Every year it happens almost like clockwork. The days get longer, the sun stays out later, the temperature rises, and everyone starts talking about how life is finally returning. Summer is here. The good season, the happy season, the season we're all supposedly waiting for, and yet for some people the reaction is strangely different. Instead of excitement, they feel resistance. Instead of energy, they feel drained. Instead of freedom, they feel pressure. Then something curious happens a few months later. The temperature drops. The sky turns gray. The evenings arrive earlier. Trees begin losing their leaves. And while everyone else complains that winter is coming, these people feel something else entirely. Relief. Not because they dislike life. Not because they're pessimistic, but because, for reasons they often struggle to explain, they feel more like themselves when the world slows down. The question is why? Why would one person come alive under bright sunshine, while another feels more mentally clear during the coldest months of the year? Psychology offers an interesting answer. Because what we're really talking about isn't weather, it's stimulation. Modern culture tends to treat stimulation as something universally positive. More activity, more experiences, more people. More events, more opportunities, more excitement. But human beings aren't all built the same way. Some nervous systems thrive when surrounded by constant input. Others begin to feel overwhelmed by it. Imagine walking into a room where 10 conversations are happening simultaneously. Some people immediately become energized. Others become exhausted within minutes. Neither response is wrong. They're simply different brains processing the same environment differently. And summer, psychologically speaking, behaves a lot like that crowded room. Everything becomes louder. The world expands outward, parks fill up, events multiply, social calendars become packed, cities stay active late into the evening, people spend more time outside, more time around others. More time doing. And while that sounds appealing in theory, it also creates a subtle psychological demand. A demand to participate. You start hearing phrases everywhere. Don't waste the weather. You should get outside. You have to enjoy it while it lasts. Come with us. Let's do something. Notice what's hidden inside all those statements, an expectation. The assumption that good weather should automatically translate into constant activity. For some people, that expectation feels natural. For others, it feels exhausting. Because every invitation requires energy. Every social event requires attention. Every plan requires mental bandwidth. And eventually, enjoyment itself starts feeling like another obligation. Winter changes that equation almost overnight. The pressure begins to disappear, people stay home more often, schedules become simpler, the outside world becomes quieter. And suddenly, nobody expects you to constantly be somewhere. For a certain type of person, this feels incredibly freeing. Not because they hate people, because they finally get room to think. This is something psychologists have observed repeatedly. Periods of reduced stimulation often increase self-reflection. When the environment becomes quieter, the mind becomes easier to hear. The thoughts that get drowned out during busier seasons start becoming visible again. Questions you've been avoiding, goals you've neglected, ideas you've never had time to explore. They begin surfacing, and many winter-preferring people describe a similar experience. They don't necessarily become happier, they become clearer. There's a difference. Happiness is an emotion. Clarity is a state of awareness. One comes and goes, the other changes how you experience everything. That's part of what makes winter feel different. The season naturally encourages inward attention. Not isolation, not loneliness. Attention. Instead of constantly scanning the outside world, you spend more time noticing your internal one. And for people who have rich inner lives, that's often where the magic happens. They read more, think more, create more, reflect more. The world becomes smaller externally, but larger internally. Which is why many people who love winter often struggle to explain their preference. Because saying, "I like cold weather," doesn't fully capture what's happening. The temperature isn't the entire story. The weather is simply creating conditions. Conditions that allow their minds to function differently, more deliberately, more calmly, more authentically. And once you understand that, a strange realization begins to emerge. Maybe winter isn't making these people feel better. Maybe winter is removing the things that were making them feel disconnected in the first place. And that possibility leads to an even more interesting question. What if the season you prefer reveals something important about the way your mind is wired to experience the world? There's another reason winter feels different for certain people. And it has less to do with temperature than it does with identity. Think about how people tend to describe themselves during summer. Busy, booked, active, always moving. There's almost a social reward attached to appearing occupied. A full calendar becomes a status symbol. The more places you've been, the more experiences you've collected, the more successful your life appears from the outside. Summer amplifies that tendency. The season naturally pulls attention toward visibility. People are outdoors more, sharing more, posting more, documenting more, living in many ways in public. For some people, that's energizing. For others, it's strangely exhausting, because not everyone experiences life through visibility. Some people experience it through depth. They don't necessarily want more experiences. They want richer ones. They don't want more conversations. They want meaningful conversations. They don't want more activity. They want activity that actually matters to them. And winter quietly supports that preference. The world becomes less performative, less focused on appearances, less concerned with momentum. You stop feeling like you're falling behind simply because you're moving at your own pace. Psychologists sometimes discuss the concept of environmental fit. The idea that well-being often depends on how well your surroundings match your natural tendencies. When there's a mismatch, even healthy people can feel drained. When there's alignment, energy returns almost automatically. This helps explain why two people can experience the same season completely differently. One person's dream summer is another person's sensory overload. One person's peaceful winter is another person's isolation. The season itself isn't creating happiness. It's revealing compatibility. And compatibility matters more than most people realize, because much of modern life encourages us to override our natural preferences, to push through, to adapt, to stay productive regardless of how we're feeling. Over time, many people become disconnected from the environments where they function best. They stop asking what helps them thrive, and start asking what they're supposed to enjoy. Winter lovers often spend years doing exactly that, wondering why everyone else seems energized by things that leave them depleted. Wondering why they feel calmer on a cloudy afternoon than at a crowded summer gathering. Wondering why silence feels comforting rather than uncomfortable. Eventually, many of them stop trying to force an explanation. They simply notice a pattern. Every year, as the weather cools, something inside them settles. Their thoughts become less scattered. Their attention becomes more focused. Their energy becomes more stable. And perhaps most importantly, they stop feeling like they're chasing something. There's a fascinating psychological reason for that. Human beings aren't designed to operate at maximum output forever. Every biological system requires cycles, effort and recovery, action and reflection, expansion and contraction. Nature understands this instinctively. Trees don't grow year-round. Animals don't remain equally active throughout every season. The natural world moves in rhythms, yet modern culture often expects people to remain permanently switched on, always producing, always improving, always progressing. Winter quietly challenges that expectation. It reminds us that slowing down isn't failure. It's part of the cycle, and some people feel deeply connected to that idea, not consciously, emotionally. The shorter days create permission to rest. The colder weather creates permission to stay in. The quieter atmosphere creates permission to focus on things that don't need an audience. Reading, learning, creating, thinking, recovering. Activities that often generate less attention from others but more meaning for ourselves. That's why many winter lovers describe the season using words that have nothing to do with weather. Peaceful, grounded, comforting, authentic, balanced. Notice how none of those words describe temperature. They describe psychological states. The season becomes a symbol for something larger, a different relationship with life, a slower relationship, a deeper relationship, a more intentional relationship. And maybe that's the real reason some people feel more alive in winter than summer. Not because they enjoy darkness. Not because they dislike sunshine. Not because they want the world to stop. But because winter allows them to hear themselves again. In a culture that constantly encourages outward attention, winter gently redirects attention inward. For some people, that feels restrictive. For others, it feels like freedom. And perhaps that's the most important thing to understand. The people who love winter aren't rejecting life. They're connecting with a version of life that feels more compatible with the way their minds naturally work. A version where reflection is valued, where quiet isn't awkward, where rest isn't something that needs to be earned, where slowing down isn't weakness, and where being yourself requires less effort. So if winter has always felt strangely comforting to you, if gray skies calm you instead of depressing you, if colder days somehow make you feel more focused, more present, or more like yourself, maybe you've never been in conflict with the season at all. Maybe you've simply discovered the environment where your mind feels most at home. And now I'm curious, when winter arrives, what changes first for you? Your mood, your energy, your focus, or your sense of peace? Let me know in the comments.